Tonight, we remember the lives of 18 people killed a year ago today in Lewiston in Maine's deadliest shooting. Good evening and thanks for joining us for News Center Maine at 5:30. I'm Brian Yacono.
And I'm Amanda Hill. The impact of that act of violence left Mainers with questions and unimaginable grief. It was traumatizing for members of the state's deaf community as well. Of the 18 people killed in the Lewiston shootings, 4 of them were part of the deaf community. Josh Seal, Brian McFarland, Billy Brackett, and Stephen Vozella were playing in a cornhole tournament for the deaf and hard of hearing at Schmenge's Bar and Grill that night. Press conferences that followed featured American Sign Language interpreters. They worked with Josh Seal. They were friends with victims, yet there they stood working to share that information. I checked in with members of the deaf community, including Stephen Vozella's wife, to find out what has changed for them in the last year.
We are starting to hear about and see access challenges.
Maine got to know Josh Seal during the pandemic as an American Sign Language interpreter for the CDC briefings. But members of the deaf community already knew and loved him.
Oh, yeah. It was really a big hole.
We spoke with Regan Thibodeau through an interpreter at the University of Southern Maine, where she teaches American Sign Language. She tells us Maine already had a small pool of interpreters after the pandemic. Many stuck with remote work. Some moved on to better paying jobs. And after October 25th, the pool got even smaller.
So when Josh, we experienced that loss, the 3 of us really had to figure out how to take over and share his caseload. The people that he was working with and providing services to on a day-to-day basis. We really had to step up and do that, and it was left to the 3 of us with only 1 male interpreter.
The good news, awareness for the deaf community and what it needs has grown since the pandemic and the shootings. More people are signing on to learn ASL, but it's not an easy or quick language to learn, as some of Thibodeau's students can explain, already a few years into their studies.
Since it is not just a different language, but it's also a different modality for hearing people who grew up with a spoken language, it's a completely different way to learn how to communicate since you're using your body in a different way. So it takes a while, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's like with trees, when you cut them down, you've planted new ones, but it takes time to let the new ones grow. Learning ASL is not a 1-year or 2-year commitment. It's a lifestyle. So when you really want to commit to this, you have to immerse yourself, you have to interact with the community, because life impacts language, and you have to figure out how to interpret that.
That's why I got into this.
So until the interpreter pool grows, members of the deaf community now scheduling a doctor's appointment or a meeting with their child's teacher means scheduling an interpreter sometimes a month in advance. And in an emergency?
I left work. I drove straight to Auburn. I knew I needed to get to the lewiston-auburn area. I knew I wasn't going to stay at work. There was no way not knowing where Steve was.
Megan Vozella lost her husband Stephen on October 25th. She also lost her friends, Josh, Brian, and Billy. That night was absolute chaos for her, not just as a terrified wife.
There were so many military personnel, there were a lot of guns out, and just so many people around. And being deaf, we weren't sure exactly where we were supposed to go, and we didn't have a full understanding of where we were supposed to be. We knew we were supposed to be St. Mary's, hopefully at the emergency room, but we were just so overwhelmed.
After 14 years with Stephen, Megan is still coming to terms with life without him, along with her daughter and her stepson.
Life's not fair. Nobody should be that heartbroken.
She says not just in emergencies, the deaf community has to be included.
In the future, I feel like we have learned a lot of lessons, right, from that night. I feel like we now know we need to improve on the emergency alert systems, on captioned communication, on having an interpreter on the front of the screen or in the frame at all times. Because oftentimes we get misinformation, it's not accurate, and our community always feels like we're at a loss.
We're getting there. We're moving along. We just want, to keep growing. We don't want to stagnate. We don't want to just go back to things the way things were. We really can't allow that. We keep getting the community out. We keep getting this visibility up. So I'm really thankful.
Thankful, Thibodeau says, that the hearing community is now listening. She'd like to see ASL interpreting at all community events, concerts, and gatherings, not just when things go wrong.
She'd also like more people to take an interest in the needs of the deaf community, get to know your neighbor better, find out how to connect in different ways, the way many did after October 25th.
Because their lives were precious and they loved their children. All four of these men were family people. The four of them just wanted to be part of the community and be out with each other.
Regan Thibodeau says the state of Maine is one of the lowest paying for interpreters. Much like a task force was formed to retain first responders and healthcare workers after the pandemic, she'd like to see more conversations around retaining interpreters, and she'd like to see members of the deaf community included at the table.